welcome to Tales of Honor Podcast, a podcast dedicated to telling the true stories of the Congressional Medal of Honor. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tales of Honor Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to telling the true stories of every Medal of Honor recipient. I'm your host, Christoph Ambrosch, and today's episode is episode number 202 and takes place during the Vietnam War. And now, a tale of honor. Charles was born in Carroll County, Virginia on the 29th of December, 1931, and graduated from Coal Creek High School before being drafted into the U.S. Army at the age of 21 in 1952. He went to Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri for basic training and then briefly served in the Korean War, but it was Charles's actions during the Vietnam War with Company A, 2nd Battalion Airborne, 503rd Infantry Regiment, 173rd Airborne Brigade, separate, that would earn him the Medal of Honor. The citation reads, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Seeing indications of the enemy's presence in the area, Staff Sergeant Morris deployed his squad and continued forward alone to make a reconnaissance. He unknowingly crawled within 20 meters of an enemy machine gun, whereupon the gunner fired, wounding him in the chest. Staff Sergeant Morris instantly returned the fire and killed the gunner. Continuing to crawl within a few feet of the gun, he hurled a grenade and killed the remainder of the enemy crew. Although in pain and bleeding profusely, Staff Sergeant Morris continued his reconnaissance. Returning to the platoon area, he reported the results of his reconnaissance to the platoon leader. As he spoke, the platoon came under heavy fire. Refusing medical attention for himself, he deployed his men in better firing positions, confronting the entrenched enemy to his front. Then, for 8 hours, the platoon engaged the numerically superior enemy force. Withdrawal was impossible without abandoning many wounded and dead. Finding the platoon medic dead, Staff Sergeant Morris administered first aid to himself and was returning to treat the wounded members of his squad with the medic's first aid kit when he was again wounded. Knocked down and stunned, he regained consciousness and continued to treat the wounded, reposition his men, and inspire and encourage their efforts. Wounded again when an enemy grenade shattered his left hand, nonetheless he personally took up the fight and armed and threw several grenades which killed a number of enemy soldiers. Seeing that an enemy machine gun had maneuvered behind his platoon and was delivering the fire upon his men, Staff Sergeant Morris and another man crawled toward the gun to knock it out. His comrade was killed and Staff Sergeant Morris sustained another wound, but, firing his rifle with one hand, he silenced the enemy machine gun. Returning to the platoon, he courageously exposed himself to the devastating enemy fire to drag the wounded to a protected area, and with utter disregard for his personal safety and the pain he suffered, he continued to lead and direct the efforts of his men until relief arrived. Upon termination of the battle, important documents were found among the enemy dead, revealing a planned ambush of the Republic of Vietnam Battalion. Use of this information prevented the ambush and saved many lives. Staff Sergeant Morris's gallantry was instrumental in the successful defeat of the enemy, saved many lives, and was in the highest traditions of the U.S. Army. Charles was later promoted to Staff Sergeant and received the Medal of Honor from President Johnson in a ceremony at the White House on the 14th of December, 1967. He stayed in the Army until 1981 when he retired as a Sergeant Major. Charles had sent his official Medal of Honor photo to a close Vietnam veteran friend, Michael Thiebelt, and had written, "I will never write my story. I will not sell anything to the TV and movie vultures, even though I had a few minor offers. I did receive the Medal of Honor for the action, but did nothing heroic that I remember." Charles Bedford Morris died at the age of 64 on the 22nd of August, 1996, and is buried in the Morris Cemetery in Fancy Gap, Virginia. And that was a Tale of Honor. Thank you for listening to Tales of Honor Podcast. Please head on over to talesofhonorpodcast.com for more information, other ways to listen and support the podcast, and please be sure to leave a good rating and a nice review. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to talesofhonorpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Christoph Ambrosch. Thanks for listening.